the impacts of a huge rail acquisition, freight is still stuck in gear, and the current health of our supply chains. Pull up a chair and join us as the editors of DC Velocity discuss these stories, as well as news and supply chain trends, on this week's Logistics Matters podcast. I am Dave Maloney. I'm the Group Editorial Director at DC Velocity. Welcome. Logistics Matters is sponsored by Storage Solutions. When equipment alone isn't enough, and your warehouse needs a real strategy, turn to Storage Solutions, a Young Heinrich company. As experts in intralogistics, they help businesses streamline operations with proven, scalable systems built for today and ready for tomorrow. From solution design to implementation and everything in between, they don't just deliver products, they deliver performance. Let's build a better warehouse together. Visit storage-solutions.com to learn more. As usual, our DC Velocity senior editors Ben Ames and Victoria Kickham will be along to provide their insights into the top stories of this week. But to begin today, last week it was announced that Union Pacific Railroad had entered into an agreement to acquire Norfolk Southern. Aside from creating a true transcontinental railroad, it would greatly expand the reach of this historic rail company. But not everyone is on board with the merger. Who's in favor and who's opposed? What's the likelihood the deal is approved, and how might it affect shippers? To find out all of that, here's Victoria with today's guest. Victoria?
Thanks, Dave. Our guest today is James Shefelbine. He's a principal at PraxiChain Consulting. And as you said, he's here to talk with us about Union Pacific's bid for Norfolk Southern and its potential effects on the rail industry and the broader supply chain. Welcome, James.
Good morning, Victoria. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. First, I wanted you to tell us a little bit about PraxiChain Consulting, your role there, and your background in transportation and supply chain, just sort of in a nutshell.
Certainly. Victoria, PraxiChain is a supply chain consulting firm that consists of over 60 industry veterans from either transportation itself or our teammates have run large supply chain organizations for manufacturing companies. My role is to help them find exciting and new opportunities to help our clients solve some of their most complex supply chain challenges. I started my career over 30 years ago with Burlington Northern Santa Fe, where I held a number of roles in operations research, finance, and marketing. And then I was asked by CSX to go lead their marketing and pricing strategies right prior to the CN merger. After CSX, I was asked by Fortress Investment to lead the commercial activity for their new purchase of Rail America, which consisted of over 45 railroads across 28 states. So really over that time, I've done a lot of cross-functional work, but mostly my activity has been trying to figure out how to improve the customer experience when they deal with the rail industry. You know, what I've found at PraxiChain is that our team brings together this kind of collective experience to every project that we take on. As I said, we're transportation veterans from the industry, and we really understand what our clients are dealing with and the struggles that they deal with every day.
Terrific. Thank you. So then last week, Union Pacific made a bid to purchase Norfolk Southern, as we said. It's a deal that would create the country's first coast-to-coast freight railway. The company's touted this as a win for the economy, for consumers, its customers, and the supply chain overall. But there's also a healthy dose of skepticism out there, too. So I wondered, what's your reaction to this deal and how it may affect the industry, just sort of overall?
Yeah, well, that is a hot topic now, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, Victoria, my reaction is really mixed. And I think that the industry needs to approach this with healthy skepticism. As I talk with my colleagues, we're seeing two very different perspectives. My colleague, Steve Truitt, who was the former VP and Chief Transportation Officer at Kansas City Southern, really makes a compelling case for why this would work. He's absolutely right that both companies already have precision scheduled railroading frameworks in place, and the technology tools that exist now in the industry are infinitely better than what existed during the UP and Southern Pacific disaster. And he really sees this as a strategic move, thinking that this is exactly what the industry needs to compete and supply new supply chain offerings to the marketplace. But then I listen to my other colleague, Karen Birchfield, who's our railroad commercial expert, and she raises some really troubling questions that we can't ignore. Karen points out that when you go from 4 Class 1s to 2, which is probably the trajectory we're on, shippers will lose 50% of their competitive options. And she's seen this movie before, as all of us, that any cost savings that the railroads achieve from these mergers will go to their bottom line rather than to clients in the form of reduced shipping costs. From my experience at CSX and dealing with complex interchange agreements at Rail America, Karen's concerns are real. The $85 billion price tag that UP is going to pay for Norfolk Southern just doesn't disappear. It gets back to the customers via rates somehow. And the real question is whether UP can hit their operational synergies while giving competitive advantages and maintaining competitive advantages for both East and West rail shippers.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you about that, about the idea that there's less choice, higher rates for shippers, and how concerned you are about that. It sounds like you share that concern. Can you dig into that a little more and maybe tell us what other issues you worry about?
Well, Victoria, I'm very concerned about this, and as are a number of many people, as we've been reading in the press for over the last couple of weeks. And frankly, the opposition from shipper groups validates exactly what Karen was warning about. NIT League, the National Industrial Transportation League, came out swinging just a few days ago, saying captive rail customers must pay increasingly higher prices for unreliable and inadequate service, despite promises of railroad efficiency. Just recently, the NIT League's executive director told Trains magazine that generally shippers oppose continued consolidation in the rail industry based on past experiences. And, what really troubles me is other industry organizations like the American Chemistry Council are echoing what NIT League is saying. But really, here's what worries me the most. Beyond just rates and competition, the Freight Rail Customer Alliance, which represents about 3,500 customers, warned that past experiences resulting in increased rates, higher fees, and unreliable service show these efficiency gains never get passed to customers. So we've learned from the past that this is almost always an opportunity to increase shareholder value, which is a CEO's responsibility. But the risk here is enormous. Every railroad veteran knows that mergers have temporarily led to severe congestion and delays across the nation. And the mergers we've seen in the past were far less complex than what we're talking about today.
So what about though the flip side of that? The companies both saying that this is a great, a good thing for the industry. You mentioned a colleague that, saw some advantages. Can you talk about how, what those potential benefits or advantages might be? How might service improve and maybe the longer term outlook if this were to go through?
Yeah, and that's the dilemma we're working to get our collective head around at PraxiChain. Look, we have to acknowledge that there are some compelling operational benefits here. And as Steve Truitt said, he talks about this kind of bold strategic thinking that the industry has needed for some time. And Jim Vina at UP makes a strong point when he says that they will remove touch points and remove 24 to 36 hours at every interchange point. So there is a tremendous operating opportunity here, both in synergies and efficiency and cost reduction. And there's a watershed opportunity too. Norfolk Southern pointed out that 95% of their interchange rail traffic is over 2,000 miles. And I think that's really important. 95% of their interchange traffic is over 2,000 miles, meaning that only 5% is under 2,000 miles. And our firm sees this as an enormous opportunity to grow rail volumes in lanes in that magic 1,000 to 1,500 mile range. Those are exactly the markets where rail loses to truck because of the complexity. And obviously, it goes without saying there's a huge impact environmentally. If you use the rule of thumb that one intermodal train removes more than 550 trucks from the highway and is 75% more fuel efficient, That really is a win-win for everybody. So, looking at it, the companies are projecting a $1.75 billion growth in revenue in 3 years by eliminating inefficient interchanges, streamlining services, and capturing new traffic. And plus, they're projecting another billion in cost savings. And even half of those service improvements materialize and get passed through to customers, which is admittedly a big if. This could genuinely transform how American manufacturing competes globally.
So this deal is subject to approval by federal regulators, and that could take some time. Do you have a sense of the timing for next steps in the process? How quickly
Yeah.
could we see a decision about this?
So the thing to bear in mind is that this merger is going to go through a separate set of rules than previous Class 1 mergers have gone through. So based on what we're seeing, particularly from the STB, we're looking at a long haul here. Think about it this way. The companies filed their notice of intent on July 30th. And under STB regulations, they have 3 to 6 months to submit their actual merger applications. So we're probably not looking at a formal application until early 2026. But here's the kicker I spoke about. Industry experts are estimating about a 19 to 22-month timeline for the STB review process. And they're going to have to use the 2001 regulations, which place a higher burden on the railroads to demonstrate that there is a public benefit. And these rules have never been before tested in a major merger. And if we use the CPKCS merger as a benchmark, that deal took about 17 months from application to approval. Shareholders of CP and KCS approved the $31 billion merger in December 2021 after both companies filed their merger application with the Surface Transportation Board on October of 2021. And the decision was approved on March of 2023. So that merger was relatively straightforward. So I think the bottom line here is that if everything goes smoothly, we might see a decision by late 2027 or early 2028. But given the opposition we've already discussed, I wouldn't bet the ranch on smoothly.
Yeah, so looks like this issue will be around for a while then.
It will be. And then what happens after this and how the other two remaining Class 1s react will add a whole nother chapter to this discussion.
A whole other dimension. James, thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you sharing your insights on this important potential change for the industry.
My pleasure.
We have been talking with James Shefelbine of PraxiChain Consulting. Back to you, Dave.
Thank you, James and Victoria. Now let's take a look at some of the other supply chain news from the week. Ben, it's no secret that the truckload sector has been stuck in low gear for quite some time now. And you wrote this week that it might be getting a little bit better out there, but where's it actually heading?
That's exactly right. Yeah, this is sort of a health check on how things are going. For the past 3 years or so, the U.S. truckload industry has been in a freight recession. That means that demand has been weakening quarter after quarter. Now there's starting to be some debate over whether that freight recession may be over. But even if it is, the sector faces a long uphill climb to get back to where it once was. So this week we saw a couple measurements of that. And it's important to look at the numbers because, of course, we live in an era of supply chain disruptions and unpredictable economic conditions. So these things, really make a difference for the industry. The first measure that we saw was the U.S. Bank Freight Payment Index. And U.S. Bank found that the U.S. truck freight market showed signs of recovery in the second quarter of this year. They said that national shipment volume rose about 2%, and spending increased a little more than 1%. That was from the previous quarter. And that marked the first quarter-over-quarter gain in both of those metrics at once in 3 years. However, U.S. Bank said it's too soon to say if we're actually out of the woods. And one of the reasons for that is something that we've been talking about a lot, and that's tariffs. The White House's policy of threatening tariffs sort of on and off, postponing them on various products, various countries, has prompted sort of pulses by U.S. companies to front load orders and try to get ahead of those rising import taxes. So it's hard to say if that rising freight demand that we saw in the second quarter is sustainable and organic, or was it just a strategic burst before tariffs might cool down the overall economy?
Right, and that's hard to tell. So, Ben, did the report conclude which scenario we're actually seeing?
No, it didn't. U.S. Bank said it's too soon to tell. They said the road to recovery remains bumpy. There's some optimism there. People often talk in the industry about seeing green shoots. So, a little bit of growth. But, to U.S. Bank's point, there was a second study that we saw this same week that agreed essentially with U.S. Bank. This was from the transportation analysis firm FTR. And FTR found that trucking fleets are acting very conservative in this time that's hard to predict. And that's measured by how few brand new Class 8 trucks they're ordering. So those orders for North American Class 8 trucks in July were up from June, but that wasn't enough to dig out of the hole that they were in. And so they posted their seventh consecutive year-over-year decrease. Year-over-year, of course, compares each month to that same month the previous year. And similar to U.S. Bank, FTR pointed to tariffs as the main reason that they see, saying that the market remains sluggish just because of the uncertainty. So, there's still a lot of freight to move, that the highways are full of trucks, but we have a long way to go to make a full recovery.
Yeah, we certainly do. I know that reports I've read, the major trucking lines have the capacity, but they've reduced what they can use right now because just things are not getting any better as of yet. But they're hopeful that it will be. It's no easy fix.
No, it's not. Yep. It's good to see a little bit of optimism, though.
Thank you, Ben.
Glad to.
And Victoria, the latest numbers are out for the Logistics Managers Index. And of course, that's a measurement of the health of the logistics industry. What do this month's numbers tell us?
Well, the numbers tell us that economic activity expanded across the logistics industry in July, driven by strong activity among middle mile firms that are sort of bearing the brunt of efforts to stay ahead of all these trade related uncertainties. And as you say, this is according to the Logistics Managers Index, or LMI report, which was released this week. And I should say this report echoes much of what Ben was just talking about as well. And just to remind our readers real quickly, the LMI is a monthly measure of transportation and warehousing activity, and it's based on a survey of logistics managers nationwide. An LMI reading above 50 indicates expansion, and a reading below 50 indicates contraction. So for July, the LMI was 59.2, which was down from June's reading of 60.7. So growth slowed a bit, but the score still indicates moderate expansion across logistics markets.
Well, modern expansion is good. And you mentioned that the July numbers were driven by middle mile companies. Can you explain exactly what that means and what did the data show?
Sure. So July's report tracked strong activity among upstream and smaller businesses. And these are primarily wholesalers, distributors, and logistics service providers who are experiencing those higher inventory levels and tighter capacity compared to their downstream retail counterparts. These are the middle mile companies, the wholesalers, distributors, and such. And they're businesses that are delivering products from warehouses and fulfillment centers to those retail locations and similar outlets. So what's happened is they've stocked up ahead of tariff deadlines as a buffer against the uncertainty businesses and supply chains have been experiencing. And this continues a trend the LMI has been tracking over the last, say, 3 months, I think. In comparison to all that, the larger companies in the industry and those downstream retailers are reporting contracting inventories, more capacity, and lower price expansion. And they're trying to maintain this sort of just-in-time inventory management strategies to avoid those higher costs. So this month's report was an interesting look at how different parts of the market are responding to what's occurring in the global economy. And as we just talked about, there's more tariffs took effect this week, and the deal making between the Trump administration and countries around the world continues. So we'll have to keep an eye on the LMI as well as some other measures to really see how this continues to affect logistics and supply chain companies.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. And of course, I don't really think that we've seen the full effect of the tariffs yet, and we may not know the true health of the industry until much later this year.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Thank you, Victoria.
You're welcome.
We encourage listeners to go to dcvelocity.com for more on these and other supply chain stories. Also, check out the podcast notes section for some direct links to read more about the topics that we discussed today. And again, we'd like to thank James Shefelbine of PraxiChain Consulting for being our guest. We welcome your comments on this topic and our other stories. You can email us at podcast@agilebme.com. We also encourage you to subscribe to Logistics Matters at your favorite podcast platform. Our new episodes are uploaded on Fridays. Speaking of subscribing, check out our sister podcast series, Supply Chain in the Fast Lane, co-produced by the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals and Supply Chain Exchange. We are in the midst of an 8-part series on the top threats to our supply chains. A few of the topics we address are geopolitical risks, economic instability, cybersecurity risks, threats to energy and electric grids, supplier risk, transportation disruptions, and much more. A new episode is dropping each Tuesday, so check out Supply Chain in the Fast Lane wherever you get your podcasts. And a reminder that Logistics Matters is sponsored by Storage Solutions. When equipment alone isn't enough and your warehouse needs a real strategy, turn to Storage Solutions, a Young Heinrich company. As experts in intralogistics, they help businesses streamline operations with proven scalable systems built for today and ready for tomorrow. From solution design to implementation and everything in between, they just don't deliver products, they deliver performance. Let's build a better warehouse together. Visit storage-solutions.com to learn more. We'll be back again next week with another edition of Logistics Matters, so be sure to join us. Until then, have a great week.